Good afternoon, everybody. Wave and unmute and say hi if you can hear me.
Afternoon.
Hi.
Oh, good,
Hi.
good. Oh, thank you so much.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you so much for coming. I think we're going to be dealing with
It's
a
not the same
very,
size the other one?
I think we're going to be talking about a very important topic. The whole concept of coaching. Before we begin, I'm going to go through a few slides about the Center for Literacy Development. My name is Leslie Morrow. I'm the director of that center. And my slide's not going forward, Kelly. What do I do?
There you go.
Okay, so just to mention that the center has many speakers during the course of the academic year. They're listed there, and I hope that you will join us. Those are all in person, and they are all outstanding authors in the field of literacy development and excellent speakers. So we hope you are there. We'll be covering skills from foundational to comprehension, social justice and equity, culturally responsive teaching. So we hope you will join us and look back. We are recording this so you can look back at these slides. We have a newsletter, and anyone's interested in writing in our newsletter, let me know. We'll be happy to have you as one of our authors. And we do current topics dealing with literacy development. We also have a Rutgers Reading Club, which is an intervention program for struggling readers. If your school's interested, be in touch with me or Kelly Clarida, our program coordinator. We do show excellent growth with this intervention program. We also do coaching. We're in many schools this fall, and actually the 4 coaches that you will meet will be coaching out in many districts. Rutgers has several programs to become a reading specialist. The most popular one is reading specialist / supervisor, where you get an MA and both certifications. If you're interested, again, get back to me. And we also work with Reach Out and Read, which is a pediatric organization, and we donate books and do projects with them. You have children's books you want to donate, bring them to our live events, and we will bring them to the center for these children. I want to shout out thank you to Kelly Clarida, who is our program coordinator. Also, Doc Lang, who works with us with our graphics, and to the board of people who are on our advisory board. If you're interested in being on the advisory board, let us know. We'll be happy to have you. It's not a lot of work. It's just helping us with advice and good ideas. When we begin, please make sure your sound is mute. You certainly can chat. We will have a Q&A at the end. And visit our website, please. And we will have a feedback survey we hope that you will use. The format for today will be, well, I'm just going to say a couple of words about coaching, and then we will introduce 4 panelists to you. So I looked up about being a coach and put something together that was written by lots of different people, but a coach is an experienced person who is supporting learners, in this case, teachers, in achieving goals by providing training and guidance. During coaching, relationships should develop between the coach and the coachee that emphasize trust. Coaches model behavior, often give advice, and engage in reflective conversations, but not evaluation. Coaching should help teachers unlock their own potential to find success through developing solutions to their problems. Coaching is a partnership and should be a thought-provoking and creative process that inspires those who are being coached to maximize their personal and professional achievement. And building relationships is probably the most important thing. Muriel and Ginny are our coaches at the center. And this was written by a supervisor from a district. Muriel and Ginny have been so engaged and so provocative. I cannot speak highly enough about their initial work in our school district. This is going to be great. I'm keeping a close eye on my grant budgets to see if we can earmark funds to extend the work dates. It seems pretty clear that the Center for Literacy Development Coaches work is already being well received by the teachers and improving our teachers' ability to develop our students' literacy skills. Nothing better than a happy customer. So we will begin. There will be 4 panelists. They are in this order: Mary McGriff, Ginny, Alicia, and Laurel. And I'll introduce you to each one of them prior to their speaking. So first up will be Mary McGriff. We are delighted to have Mary with us. She is a full professor of literacy education at New Jersey City University. Her research, teaching, and professional development projects focus on culturally and linguistically responsive English language arts instruction. Dr. McGriff has authored several journal articles and book chapters. In her early career, she was a teacher of language arts, a vice principal, and a principal. She is contributing author to the book Beloved Educators, Women of Color Who Inspire Us. I am thrilled and delighted to have her with us with her busy schedule. She will speak about building relationships with reflective conversations. Mary, you have the floor.
Oh, thank you, Leslie, and thank you to everybody. September is such a tremendously busy time of the year, so thanks everyone for attending. What I'd like to share a little bit about is related to the idea of cultivating relationships. And sometimes working with individual teachers on our teams is tremendously easy. It's a natural way to kind of fall into a flow with that person, and you just go from there. Sometimes it requires just a little bit of effort, and then you just go from there. And other times it requires quite a bit of intentional forethought, and it takes a little bit more time and effort to cultivate that productive relationship. And so what I'd like to do is share a little bit about that latter category and offer one perspective and 2 tools or strategies that might be helpful in that regard. And so just by virtue of the fact that we're all human, we each and every one of us have what I like to call a unique set of lenses that we see through, that we interpret the world through, and that we move through our days at school and in life, basically, as a result of. And our lenses are made up of different combinations and concentrations of those factors that you see there on the screen, kind of surrounding those lenses. And we're each made up of various combinations of these, and knowing your own combinations is a really important step when working with folks that might think differently from you professionally, or may act differently from us, or that just might be a little bit tough to get to know. And I love the metaphor of lenses, right? Because if you've all been to the optometrist, you know what happens. You sit in a chair, they slide that device in front of your eyes that obscures your vision, and then the optometrist goes, "What's clearer, A or B?" And you answer, and then they do the next thing for the other eye, C or D. And at the end of this visit, what happens is we each step away with a unique combination of A's and B's, C's and D's that make up how we see the world. But instead of lens magnifications, what we have instead is a variety of identity factors that make up who we are. And what's important isn't that we know those of the other teachers around us. What's important is that we know our own. Because when we know our own, we can always remember that whenever we have a situation where we're working with a teacher where it's a little bit difficult, it's not us. It's not about us. We each have our own lenses and our own ways of making sense of the world. And so one thing I like to do, Leslie, if you could just advance the slides, great. One thing I like to do is very literally work to keep my own lenses prescription crystal clear in my mind at all times. So what you see on the left is who I am, right? So rather than words, I'm somebody that likes linguistic representation. So thinking about all the factors, familial, uh, ethnicity, race, gender, and all of these things, I just draw little pictures and sketches that keep in the forefront of my mind who I am. And I also keep it someplace where I can see. So if you look at the bottom there, that red arrow, that's literally right here in front of my workspace. And I can't turn left or right without remembering what grounds me as a professional. What I've done there at the bottom of that screen is link to the template of those glasses. And just for yourself, or maybe for the teachers that you work with, take a second. Who are you? Know your lenses and put them in a place where you can see them to sustain your work and to remember that over the long term in coaching teachers, it's relationships that take place and it begins with us knowing who we are. Leslie, if you could just advance. Great. One strategy or tool that I use and would like to share with everybody is just to know at least one thing that's unschool related about every teacher that's on your team and learn these things authentically, right? So nothing should be contrived. It should be sincere connections, which honestly do take time to develop. But, you know, for everybody, do both of you have a newborn someplace in your extended family? Do you each, you know, like the same author? Are you caring for aging parents? Whatever that connection is, intentionally cultivate the connection. And, you know, do this in non-coaching situations, right? So be it dismissal, know where you can, when you can go into the copier room and run into this teacher, or into the lunchroom and run into that teacher, and use your information to just genuinely build relationships. And what I like to do, because I work with a lot of folks and because I'm busy and so is everyone with whom I work, I like to put little notes in my calendar, right? So in 1 month, I like to say, gosh, I need to make sure I've reminded this teacher that Kristen Hanna has a new book out, ask about, you know, that one's, you know, mother's surgery that was coming up, share some information about my mom, you know, so just have time to do this, but so that I don't forget, I actually plan it. And I don't really look at that as something that's insincere, you know, putting reminders in my phone. I look at it as more or less a practical way of fostering authentic rapport when we're all very, very busy. And then the last thing I wanted to share in terms, Leslie, if you could just forward, please. Cool, thank you. The last thing that I wanted to share comes back to what we're doing as coaches, right? So we can know who we are and we can have that solidified. We can work on out of school connections with those on our team. But at the end of the day, the gist of our work is instructional. And it involves instruction, it involves planning, and sometimes unavoidably and inescapably, we can find ourselves in a position where we need to have a conversation with somebody that we're not 100% comfortable about having, or even 50% comfortable about having. And one of the things that I like to do is remember that we don't need to start from scratch. Great literacy coaches have come before us. They've provided a rich variety of tools, and one that I love is sentence stems, because that works great for kids. And it's amazing how many things, if you just tweak it, work amazingly for us too. So I've actually used sentence starters around a variety of different kinds of conversations that I have with coaches, and I've cited and linked some resources there at the bottom of that slide for you. Have a look, tweak it, you know, to make it your own voice. But most importantly, just remember that there's tools available so that we can go into conversations, even the ones that we're so about, with a level of confidence and to the ultimate benefit of the teacher and the students that they serve. So those are just some strategies that I'd like to share out, and just wishing everyone a wonderful start to the school year.
Thank you, Mary. I love your sentences, and everyone, I hope you can see them. And go, as I said, we're going to record, this is recorded, but her sentence strips such as, can you help me understand that better? That's great. I would love to share with others how you're applying.
Leslie, we can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm actually just reading her sentence strips because I think they're so good. So I'm suggesting that others take a screenshot of this or go back to it because they're very valuable. Thank you
And-
so much.
And
Yes.
Kelly, will they have the PowerPoint to this where they can
Uh,
actually access the link there?
Yeah, we can do that. We will
Great.
do that.
Very good.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mary.
Definitely. Pleasure.
Next, we have Ginny Larashi, who has taught for over 40 years, grades 2 through 4. In addition to being a classroom teacher, she's had the privilege of working as a reading specialist and a literacy coach in a public school district. During her tenure, Ginny has served as a Title I coordinator. She has experience in developing curriculum and literacy coaching protocols. Ginny has been named Teacher of the Year and is currently working as a literacy coach for the Center for Literacy Development. And she's going to talk about assessing needs of the cultural and physical environment and determining classroom goals. Okay, Ginny,
Okay,
there you go.
thank you very much, Leslie. That was great. And hi, coaches, welcome. September is always an exciting time of year for educators. As a coach, I'm thinking of ways I can support my teachers in providing the best learning experiences for their students. To begin, I start with looking at the physical environment. I think about the classroom space. Is the classroom space arranged in different groupings? Is there a meeting place for whole group work, small group work, and individual work? Classroom furniture, is it set up to support independence and safety? Classroom supplies, are they well organized and easily accessible? I think about the wall space in the classrooms that I work in. Classrooms need a space for anchor charts and word walls and student work. Classrooms have instructional materials that reflect images and perspectives from diverse groups. Classrooms have purposeful displays that do not overload the classroom. And then I think about the routines and rituals that we need to establish in September in order for learning to take place. And I support my teachers in using specific techniques to get students' attention, whether it be a clap or a catchy phrase, flashing the lights on and off, whatever. The teachers need to establish a way in order to get the students' attention. Teachers develop and teach routines for managing materials. Some districts work with phonics programs that may have lots of manipulatives that need to be handed out. It's a great time saver if we can support those teachers in developing the routines for managing classroom materials. Teachers and students develop routines for managing transitions. Maybe our students aren't familiar with getting into small group work because of the pandemic, so we may need to revisit these areas. Teachers and students develop norms for facilitating a safe and productive environment. So there's a picture of a student in a nice cozy place to do some independent reading, which is great. If the teacher can set up a place like that for their students, that's terrific. Next slide, please, Dr. Morrow. So this is an example of an anchor chart. Anchor charts are often made in the class or should be made in the class with the teachers. We may need to explain to our teachers that anchor charts are anchored to a lesson that was taught by the teacher while the students were in the classroom. Sometimes you'll see pre-made posters and things displayed on the wall. Those are not anchor charts. The purpose of the anchor chart is so that the students look at the chart and remember the lesson that was taught to create that chart. Next slide, please, Dr. Morrow. This is a picture of a wonderful classroom library. The classroom library is divided up into a leveled library section, a genre section, and a section for subjects. There's several anchor charts that are hanging in the classroom. This happens to be a classroom library for an upper grade class, and the teacher has several bullets for the students to tend to. I tend to think there are too many bullets. I usually like to keep it 5 or 6 when I'm creating anchor charts, but it's a wonderful place for students to choose books for independent learning. Before I go on to the next slide, this is an upper grade class, as I said before. Something that we need to think about when we're supporting our teachers in building a classroom library is including a share about 30%, 40% of decodable books. There is a big shift now in the thinking of using decodable books. There was a time when decodable books were frowned upon because they weren't authentic and they really weren't, it wasn't good literature. But now the research is showing that students need to practice those isolated phonics skills in actual reading. So if you could support your teachers in developing and adding to their classroom library some decodable books, that's great. Next slide, Dr. Morrow, please. Okay, so now we want to think about, we looked at the physical environment of the classroom. Let's think about the cultural environment of the classroom. We want to ensure as educators that we recognize that all students have different needs. We want to ensure as educators that we pay attention to our own mindset and be aware of any biases that we may have. These are difficult conversations that you may need to have with your teachers. We want to ensure that educators create a community of trust where students from all backgrounds and identities feel safe to speak up. We want our students to feel valued in our classroom. As educators, we want to promote diversity in our curriculum, and not just in literature or social studies, but in science and math too. As educators, we want to collaborate with families and community to strengthen that school to home connection. When families and teachers work together, students achieve. As educators, we want to be able to communicate in linguistically and cultural responsive ways. If you're running a literacy night and you're sending out a Zoom link, if you can have that translated or presented by someone who speaks the language of the students and the families, that's terrific. If you can have any flyers or notices that go home translated into students' home language, it means so much. Next slide, please, Dr. Morrow. And after we have assessed the physical environment and the cultural environment of the classroom, now it's time to roll up our sleeves and come up with some goals with our teachers. After we made some observations, we have some conversations with our teachers. In September, what do we want to achieve? What are some goals that we would like to set in place for the beginning of the year learning? And coaches, the best way to start a goal, to connect to a goal, is to create a goal that has already been in place, or connect to what's already been in place. So if the teacher says, I want to create a goal that improves independent reading, it's already in place. I have an anchor chart, but I can tell from my class that my students are not really reading. Reading is not taking place. So there you have it. It's already in place. Now we're just going to tweak what's already in place. When you're creating a goal, think about the impact that goal has on student learning. Now, if the goal is to increase independent reading, we know the impact that has on student learning. We know that students learn to read by reading and not by doing reading activities. We also want to consider, when we are creating goals, the SMART framework. SMART, S-M-A-R-T. We want the goal to be specific. We want it to be measurable. We want it to be attainable. We want it to be realistic. And we want it to be timely. And lastly, coaches, when you're creating goals with your teacher, consider teaming up with others for support in achieving that goal. So if the goal is to implement independent reading, you may want to invite the school librarian into that goal, to create that goal in the library when the students have independent reading time. Maybe you want to share that goal with the interventionist, the Title I teacher, the basic skills teacher, the resource room teacher, the ELL teacher. the more buy-in that you have in this goal, the goal will be more likely achieved. And teachers, remember, every time, and this is research-based, every time a coach helps a teacher, the coach is helping every other student that teacher works with. And before I sign off, coaches, remember that teachers are learners too and need their unique needs met. Your job is to support, not force. Always communicate the what, the why, and the how for everything, and have an awesome year. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Ginny. Valuable information. When we're finished with all the presentations, I'd like to come back to talking about the instructional reading materials you mentioned, because instructional reading materials and independent reading can be very different, and we've forgotten that a bit. And the teaming up of co-teaching is so beneficial for teachers and for children. Thank you again. Our next presenter is Alicia, and she has nearly a decade of experience as an instructional literacy coach. She has years of hands-on experience working directly with teachers to implement literacy best practices in the classroom. Alicia graduated from the Rutgers program with the Reading Specialist Certificate and the master's degree. Prior to becoming a coach, Alicia worked as a classroom teacher and interventionist. Alicia is also an active member of a community where she helps to spread her love of literacy by volunteering as president of the Warren Township Library Advisory Board. And she's going to be talking about how she has set up lab classrooms in schools for modeling and co-teaching. Welcome to you, Alicia.
Thank you, Dr. Morrow. So I'm so glad that Ginny said the what, the why, and the how, because as I'm talking about setting up these meaningful lab classrooms, that's kind of how I'm introducing them to you. So lab classrooms can be a super, super meaningful PD opportunity for teachers in our buildings. It's bringing in-house what we've learned and practicing it together. We're designing learning for our teachers in our buildings, making it something that they can put into practice right away. I also think it's so relevant, and it's a way to get our teachers active in their learning. Why we do this is because it empowers teachers. It allows them to collaborate. When we enter a lab classroom together as a grade level, as colleagues in the same building or same district, we're actually modeling for these teachers how to collaborate and reflect on their learning, providing these opportunities for this active engagement, taking control of what we are learning. I often think, I don't know if anyone out there is still holding on to Grey's Anatomy, but when we think about surgical theater and we watch those interns up in the window looking so excited about how this master is completing this surgery, this is what I think of when I think of a lab classroom, not necessarily our interns, but our colleagues coming together and sharing in this lesson or this activity that is going amazingly, or doesn't have to be perfect, something we can reflect and think back on. So when we're thinking about the how, well, how are we going to have these lab classrooms in our regular school building? Very easily. We're going to have a host classroom. So we're going to find a class that not necessarily, like I said, is perfect, but a class where the teachers in that room and the students are open and willing to learn. I like to think of choosing a teacher that is not known in the school as the best teacher. Everyone's like, oh, that teacher is going to get chosen to do this thing because they're the greatest in our building. But think of those quietly amazing teachers, those teachers that are going about their business, doing hard work, and maybe asking them to be our host teacher, the teacher whose classroom will become our lab classroom. If you're feeling like very confident in your school and choosing, you may even open it up to volunteer, someone who's willing to open their doors to all of us to become learners within the building. So once you choose that host classroom, you're thinking about your guest teachers. You're thinking about who's going to come into my lab. Oftentimes it might be the same grade level. Sometimes it might be a group of teachers across grade levels who are looking at the same topic, the same idea in learning. Maybe it's student engagement. Maybe it's a structure that we have in our literacy box, our literacy block. The most important thing is that our teachers know when we're entering our lab classroom that this is a place for learning, not a place for evaluation. And it's a place where we're definitely going to be open-minded. We're going to have that growth mindset, and we're going to work together through any kinks or things that come up. So how is we have a pre-observation meeting? We have our observation and our debrief. So we're setting up our lab classrooms. We're going in with our teachers for the first time, and we're going to have these 3 steps to make sure that we solidify all the learning and we collaborate together. Dr. Morrow, can you advance to the next slide? Thank you. So here is the how, what's happening in a lab classroom. So prior to going in the class, and we're going to review the best practices. So the coach or the facilitator of that lab site, that lab classroom, will make sure that all of our guest teachers and our host have a shared understanding of what we're going in to observe together. So maybe it's a guided reading lesson. So let's have a conversation about what a guided reading lesson should look like, what would make a guided reading lesson successful. We also might frame look-fors. We might make a list with our teacher. These are the things that we want to see in this room, right? These are the ways we will know students are engaged. These are the types of questions that we would like to hear the teacher ask the students. This could be pre-planned, or it might even be nice during that pre-observation to kind of create this together as a note-taking tool for our guest teachers. Then we'll set some norms with, I keep saying that, open mind, but when you are having a lab classroom and you are gathering teachers together, you really want to make sure the culture is that we are growing together. We are not evaluating. So you want to set those norms to make sure that we go in with the same ideas. Then we go into our observation, and we are going to engage teachers in this. We are going to make sure that our teachers are super psyched to be in this classroom. It will start with the coach or the facilitator modeling whichever ELA practice it might be. Sometimes a lab classroom could be for a whole ELA period. Sometimes it might be for like just a little slice of ELA. Like I said before, like the guided reading, or maybe a conference or a different type of small group, or read aloud. So after the model, you might even provide time for your guest teachers to jump in the teaching. Sometimes they might just sit and observe and take notes. Sometimes you might have them jump in to engage them even further. That can be done by one way, one example. Say the coach does a conference, a writing conference, and is modeling the conference, maybe providing some tips to the teachers in the room about the conference. Then those teachers that have observed can spread out through the classroom, grab another student, and do the same type of activity, the same type of writing conference, to try it out right away. That gives teachers time to kind of like play with it, low stakes. We're in someone else's classroom, we're just trying our practice together. It's a great opportunity for that. Or maybe even during your pre-observation, you work with those guest teachers and they teach a piece of the lesson, pre-planned all together. You may even have teachers actively engaged by looking at student work, evidence of learning. Finally, this observation, your lab site is over, and it's time to debrief. It's time for the coach or the facilitator to have a guided discussion, reflecting on what we saw, what we learned, our takeaways, our aha moments, what we might try tomorrow, a goal for ourselves. I like to tell teachers, you're going to set a goal and let's come up with some actionable steps, because I know a lot of times, especially in PDs, we're not engaged. We're like, I'm going to do this tomorrow. This is great. I love this idea. But unless we make a plan for ourselves, we get caught up in, you know, this one kid comes in and he's sick and this child happens to this. But if we set it with a little quick 3-step goal, 2-step goal with steps, we really actually sometimes try it the next day. Dr. Morrow, can you change to the next slide? So we think logistics. Well, how do I set up a lab classroom? What does it look like? this is the best part of a lab classroom. It's a classroom. It doesn't look any different, except we have lots of teachers coming in to learn. I find that the students love it because when you frame it to the students, what's happening in their classroom, they're like, what? The teacher's gonna learn from me? This is amazing. But it looks like a regular old classroom, except we have had this pre-observation. We have our guest teachers in and we're there to learn alongside of our students. There is nothing special to set up. I think when we keep it that low stakes and we don't make the well, your children have to listen, they have to do this. No, this is authentic. Johnny might be standing on the table throwing his paper in the air because Johnny doesn't like to sit still, and that's okay. Sorry, Johnny. But our lab classroom is an authentic experience in our buildings with our students, so we can truly work together and become learners and problem solve and practice these best practices. And another thing, if we can advance to the next slide with logistics, and don't mind that 01, we don't know where that came from. It appeared in some of the transferring. So pretend it's not there. But the nice things about lab classrooms is you can give a lot of teachers coaching and PD quickly in one shot with minimal subs and minimal interruptions. So I have a possible schedule here. You can see that's if we got 4 substitute teachers, we are giving, I believe that's 12 teachers PD in that one day with 4 substitute teachers, which is one way you could break up. You could set up lab sites or lab site classrooms. You could also just hold teachers for like during their prep to go to a different class, or during a PLC time, maybe your kindergarten teachers have a common planning PLC time and they could go to the first grade classroom, and that set up as a lab site. There's lots of ways to work this into a daily schedule so that there's minimal interruption. I know we don't like to have lots of subs and sub shortages are going on, less worrying about that, but still providing our teachers with a lot of PD and a lot of practice. And I wish you all the best of luck this school year. September is my favorite, and it's always a time to try something new. So maybe this is something you try in your buildings.
Thank you so much, Alicia. I love what you said about the kids like it. I could actually imagine the children showing off how good they are because people are coming to visit and they want to impress them as being something real positive about a lab classroom, in addition to many of the other things you said. And I'm sure people will have questions. I'm going to introduce Laurel, and then I'm going to unshare and she's going to share. But I'm delighted that she is a coach with us with 25 years of experience, building robust impact curriculum, teaching strategies and leadership development that empower children, teachers, and school district leaders to improve their schools and increase student achievement. Laurel's an expert in literacy best practice and communicating to a diverse range of audiences and learning types. In addition, Laurel is passionate about introducing social justice and educational equity initiatives that enhance the learning experience and involve positive change in school communities. She's already been out coaching a lot for us, even though school just started. I think she's been in 3 different districts already. She's going to talk about organizing the language arts block. Bear with us, folks. I'm stopping share. And well, let's wave to each other now that we can see each other. And Laurel is at this moment going to put up her, there she is. She's much better at it than I am.
Thanks, Leslie.
I would still be fiddling around. Go ahead. We're anxious to hear from you.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here with everyone. So I'm going to be talking about organizing the literacy block, and it's one of those topics that is always talked about in schools because, of course, how do we organize that block? I know teachers spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to organize for instruction. So today I'm hoping what I share with you is something that will be helpful. It's how I've always thought about the block when I taught first grade, third grade, or even seventh grade. And of course, we know the block is going to look different depending on the grade level and the time of the school year. And I hope this is going to help you to be able to create a block that's structured and provides and allows you to provide effective literacy instruction for your children. So the first thing I want to talk about, and I just want to make sure you're seeing my slide that says opportunities for.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. I want to talk about one of the things we know is that children need opportunities for lots of reading, writing, and also language and word study. So when I think about how I organize the block, I'm thinking about these instructional practices. When we think about reading and writing, we think about giving children opportunities to see good models of reading and writing, get opportunities to share reading and writing, and get opportunities for guided practice in reading and writing, and opportunities to do their own independent reading and writing. So think about it as to, with, and by, with the amount of teacher support becoming less and less as we move from modeled reading and writing down, which is the to the shared and guided, which are the with, and then to the independent, which is the by, right? And then we know with when we talk about and think about language and word study, we know it's important for children to have blocks of time dedicated to developing their oral language and studying how language and words work. They need explicit instruction in phonological awareness, phonics, spelling, grammar, and vocabulary. So now it's, well, how do we organize all these opportunities that we know we need to have for children, right? We know we need to integrate. We need reading and writing. Reading and writing need each other. They're not taught in a vacuum. And we know that language and word study, although you need that chunk of time for explicit instruction, we hear that all the time, you need that chunk of explicit instruction in phonics, right? We know that we also need to integrate all this into real reading and writing opportunities. So the way how I think about it is in buckets. So if there are any artists out there, please bear, no shame on my pictures. I tried my best. So the way how I think about this is in buckets with dedicated times for read aloud, shared reading, language and word study, and then reading and writing workshop. Oftentimes, I would hear teachers say, I do reading and writing workshop. And then I say, well, okay, well, what about the other components of reading and writing workshop? And sometimes some teachers, I realize, don't have an explicit plan for how to schedule for those other components that need to be there. And what I hope that you can take away today is this idea of you need all these things to be happening daily. Of course, with the older grades, you need to think about it as maybe weekly chunks or even monthly or semester chunks, and you'll see that a little later. With the younger grades, it's a bit easier to schedule because you normally have 120 minutes allocated to literacy instruction. With the older grades, you have like an 80 to 90 minutes block, and some schools I've even seen they've had 45 minutes, and that's a lot trickier to schedule. But again, you still want to think about all these components. So let's first talk about the whole class text. You want opportunities for children to be a part of a read aloud with collaborative discussion. And you want opportunities for children to be a part of a shared or performance reading, again, with collaborative discussion. Notice how I have the collaborative discussion in there, because we know we're doing more than reading text with children. We want them to be thinking deeply, talking about text, responding to text and each other. And so you're doing that with the whole class text. And then you also want that other chunk of time, that explicit instruction in language and word study. And that's, again, where you see all the time schools would have that, oh, that's our phonics block. The stuff that you're doing during your read alouds or your shared or performance reading and language and word study, they then trickle into the reading and writing workshop. So when you're doing reading and writing workshop, you have to do all those other components. Because you want what you do in those other components to trickle down into reading and writing workshop. So you show children how language arts work during those big buckets, the read aloud, the shared reading, and then the language and word study. And then reading and writing workshop is the independent time. That's when children now get to try out all the good stuff that you've been teaching them, right? And we know children need many opportunities of being part of and trying out all this stuff before we expect them to do it on their own. You can't expect children to notice characters changing throughout a story unless you've modeled that for them first and have given them lots and lots of opportunities while reading to do it with you and to do it in smaller groups before they try it out on their own. And that's why you can't just do reading and writing workshop. It's part of the whole. You need the other components. So another thing for us to talk about is what's actually happening during each of these buckets. So first, we're going to look at the whole class text buckets. You're doing either a read aloud or a shared or performance reading. And of course, you always want collaborative discussion. And I want you to think about these buckets as menus. You can pick and choose what instructional practices you do within these buckets based on the needs of your children, your curriculum, your district, and they're fluid. Also, these instructional practices are not limited to any particular bucket. So for example, in the read aloud bucket, after reading aloud to children, you might want to model for them how to write a response in their reader's notebook in response to something that you just read as a whole class. You could do the same thing in the shared and performance reading bucket. What that does then is that you're modeling and you're doing it with them during that read aloud time with real text. So then in reading workshop or writing workshop, you could refer back to the work that you did in your read aloud or your shared reading. If you have not been tracking characters changes with children during read aloud, you can't then expect an 8 to 12 mini lesson in a reading workshop to help them to understand and practice that. That's the importance and the value of really making sure you have that read aloud and that shared reading time, right? Read aloud a lot of that comprehension stuff. In the shared reading, especially in K-2, you're having children notice how print works. So you're reading those big books and you're tracking print and you're noticing quotation marks. In the upper grades, maybe you're teaching children how to infer and you want them to notice what the text says and think about what their head says and then make an inference, but they need to see that. So that read aloud, I always think about it as the more of the comprehension-y stuff. And the shared reading, now eyes are in print, so it's how texts work. You're looking at it, right? And what's nice is that the teacher decides what instructional practices they do on any given day. Sometimes in the read aloud bucket, you might want to engage in a shared reading with children. And then sometimes in the read aloud bucket, you might want to respond independently. You might want them to even respond independently after you've read something, a response to literature. And then in reading and writing workshop, there's a structure to that too. There's a mini lesson, a work period, and then a share period. And it's the same for the reading workshop and the writing workshop. And then what happens in the work period for reading and writing is in the reading workshop, kids are reading independently. In the writing workshop, kids are writing independently. But there are other things that are happening too. The teacher could then pull a small group and can do guided reading. They can work on decodable text. They can do strategy groups. And sometimes the teacher is working and pulling individual children and doing independent conferences with them. And then at the end, and that, of course, what happened in the reading block, in the writing workshop block, now the children are writing independently, and same thing, teacher is pulling, the children could also be working in partnerships, and the teacher is pulling and doing individual or small group conferences. And then we end with a share. Share could be whole class. I remember one time in kindergarten, in the beginning of the school year, after a writing workshop, every child got up and shared. You do that maybe earlier on. Nothing says it has to be the same way every time. There are different ways. So use this as a menu to pick what you want to do on any given day. And finally, just to show you what this might look like, just thinking about grades K to 2, if you notice, there's a time for the read aloud, there's a block of time for shared reading. And then, of course, you have your language and word study, and then your reading and writing workshop. In 3 to 5, normally you do either a read aloud or a shared read in a day. You don't have time to do both, because depending on the schedule. If you have time, great. But if not, it's normally either a read aloud or a shared read. Still, you have that block of time for your language and word study, and then you have your reading and writing workshop. And the time, the minutes, depending on the time of the year again, you can choose. And then I'm just going to jump to what this might look like for upper grades, for your middle schools, or for when you have just 80 to 90 minutes. You don't have time every day to have a read aloud, language and word study, and reading workshop and writing workshop. So what you have to do, you have to almost block that time and maybe do a reading focus week or writing focus week. And when you do your reading focus week, of course, you still have your read aloud, your language and word study, and your reading workshop. When you do your writing focus week, still need to have time for read aloud, still need to have time for language and word study, and your focus is your writing workshop, but children still need to be reading independently daily. So you still want to put, even if it's a little bit of time, you would do a quick mini lesson, a quick share, but still give them time to read when you have that writing focus week. And then finally, this is what it might look like if you take like a month or a marking period. You're literally blocking. So you decide, it doesn't have to be 1 week reading, 1 week writing. It could also be 7-9 days of reading and then 3 days of writing, whatever works well for your for you. So I hope this helps a little bit to help you think about organizing your literacy block. And I'm just really excited for you starting the school year. And
if you can unshare your screen, and let's give
Sure.
a round of applause for the speakers. I learned something different from each one of them and appreciated a great deal. If you have a comment or a question, we have just a few more minutes. We can raise your hand either with the, little raising hand, or just unmute and shout it out. I don't know if I see someone or not, but what I wanted to ask, those who have co-teaching, if anyone has co-teaching, their response to that kind of activity.
Wait,
in
one
your-
of them, hold on a second. Somebody asked me for a location. Yeah, but it was during your teacher orientation. So it's her and Tara Lucy.
I can't hear you. Whoever was speaking, we lost you. I'm sorry. I hope we can get back to you afterwards. Did the co-teaching? Yeah, go
Leslie,
ahead.
there is a question in the chat.
Okay,
It
go ahead.
says that they really like the LA block schedule. How does this work for 15-minute periods? I teach upper middle school.
Okay, Laurel, you want to take
Sure.
that?
So with 50-minute periods, I was saying that's a little bit tricky, because you're only going to get done in that time. You can't, when you have 90 minutes, right? You could still have that read aloud and reading workshop. Now you almost have to think of your 50 minutes as 2 50-minute blocks to get in what you would get in on one of those days, if that makes sense. So one day it might be your read aloud and a little bit of reading workshop. And then the next day, it might be, again, still a read aloud and a little bit and reading workshop, but maybe shorter read aloud, longer reading workshop, because you don't have enough time to do that one block. So it's thinking about taking your 2 50-minute blocks, putting it together and taking that one day, and it's like carrying it over. Does that make sense?
It does to me.
Yeah.
But I know it's tricky in the upper grades. And that's why we need to have longer language arts blocks than we do.
A lot of school districts, what they do is they do that block where at least you would get for some people, even if it's every other day, you have that longer time, because then it's, you know, children writing 50 minutes for upper grades or even young kids to write. That's not a lot of time by the time you do a mini lesson and that time for the work period and share. So 50 minutes is a bit short, but again, you use what you have. So I would just, if you're doing writing workshop, one day, you know, you're doing you get your nice healthy mini lesson in, the kids are writing, and then your share is very short, and almost think about that second day being the rest of it, where again, now quick mini lesson, because you would have done that mini lesson from the day before. So quick, because it's a new day, give children a longer time to write and then a shortened share. So you've just done your read aloud and writing workshop in 2 days instead of having both things in one day, because you only have 50 minutes.
Yeah, I love the question in the chat box that says, for any of the presenters, for districts that may not have dedicated coaches, what are some creative solutions around still providing coaching supports for teachers? Well, one of the things that I'm going to say about that is in my teaching in my graduate classes, many of the students, my graduate students, have begun coaching situations in their schools where they didn't exist, because they recognize the importance of it. Shannon, am I right? Did that happen with you? Where you're coaching now and you didn't have coaching, or is there someone who sometimes you need to take the initiative, but does another coach want to and respond to that?
In our
One
district,
thought-
Leslie, oh, sorry, Dr. Morrow. In our district, we had a literacy coach, and then they made our literacy coach into our administrator also, so she does both roles. So she is in charge of helping me, the reading interventionist, with everything, but she still goes into the classroom. And we actually, before I became a reading interventionist, I worked with her and we did the lab classrooms, and we had teachers come in and we modeled how to do like a guided reading lesson or a shared read aloud for new teachers, and it worked out really well. Everybody learned from each other. It was a really nice atmosphere.
Yeah. Thank you. Mary?
Sure. I just wanted to share that there are a lot of critical friends protocols out there that you can Google, but this is a way that a group of colleagues, right, can kind of formally follow a kind of a set of directions, loose in quotes, right? So, loosely formed directions, but guidelines for working together to provide one another with feedback about, whatever it is that you're studying in terms of your goal for your classroom. And it's a lot less, formalized, but, informal targets, or even find things for a couple or three folks that are gathered that are interested to pursue on their own. So that's another option where funding might not be available.
I mean, research has shown that one of the best forms of professional development is coaching. So if your district does not have it, it's something you ought to advocate for. We are at the end of our time. I would like to thank the panelists for their excellent ideas and preparation. Thank you all for coming. We have a very lovely audience today, and we appreciate the fact that during the very busy beginning of school you came, and I hope that it was of value to you. those people who have class, you need to leave this and go to a new link for your class because it's not continuing on this. And once again, I'd like to give a round of applause for our panelists. I thought it would be easy to coordinate a panel. They made it easy, but coordinating is never that easy. Thank you so much, everyone, for your participation, and have a wonderful school
Thank
year.
you.
And I hope to see you in October when we have Cornelius Minor and Ken Kunst as a speaker. Bye.